for me to die.
So this movie, while I think overarchingly depicting his life, has some historical inaccuracies. I mean, there's some debate as to how involved in the plot he was, and by that I mean he was involved, but probably more likely as a spy and someone who passed information off, and less sort of directly as the movie depicts. But you know, it's good cinematography to have him be in the middle of everything. So keep that in mind. I'll also say that the books that they reference, so Cost of Discipleship and Life Together, it's important to think about Bonhoeffer's theology as the fact that discipleship and grace in particular should not be cheap, that one, we should not be interested in forgiveness without any kind of repentance, which I think is a lot of times how we imagine Christianity. Like, we don't have to change anything and we're still forgiven. But really there should be some understanding of what we have done wrong, an acknowledgement of that, and then a shift to go a different direction. So repentance literally means to turn around. And then also salvation without any kind of change in the way that we live, which again goes back to that repentance idea. And so knowing that Bonhoeffer's big sort of overarching principle is both that Jesus is the one who is Lord over everything, and clearly in his lifetime that played up against not the Führer, but more importantly that we should also live our faith. I'm wondering, how do you sort of think about that, not just for Bonhoeffer's life, but for our own lives? What does that look like? And I have a mic, so if you want to speak, yeah, if you'll do. So Julie will come around with a mic if you have thoughts. I know it's a heavy way to start, so we'll just take a minute.
I think once you make that decision, it's a daily journey of continuing to reflect on ourselves and what we need to change and what we do. It's not make that decision and everything's great. It's a daily journey, and it's hard. Some days are harder than others, for sure.
I agree. So Julie said that it's a daily choice that you have to make. And I think that you do see that. Bonhoeffer did go back to America near the end of the war. And then, you know, he could have stayed there. But again, it's a daily choice that you have to make.
One of the things that really brings this home to me is how really late the United States came to the party. And I'm paraphrasing our trivia team title, but that it took us a long time, probably because of our distance and less the barriers, to see what was really horribly happening. That brought this home to me.
Thank you. The thing that has always intrigued me is there were a number of assassination attempts on Hitler, but as the war started to draw to a close, I think it was less likelihood of it succeeding. If there had ever been a chance, I think the majority of historians feel it would have been in 1936 when he moved in, took over the Rhineland, and that probably might have been the only time this all could have been prevented. But the British and the French weren't up to it for various reasons, and so then we have these ensuing tragedies going on. I found particularly moving the bit in the movie about when Dietrich Bonhoeffer had the chance to leave Germany, but he knew if he did, his family would be annihilated. And I'd sort of forgotten that. That's a pretty powerful moment for me. Anyway.
I'm just curious how many people have ever visited Germany and any of the prisoner of war camps or the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Just sitting in the car in Washington, D.C. Was pretty powerful. I mean, you get this feeling. And where are we now?
Since you ask where we are now, it occurs to me that if you study history, and we've had a lot of presentations in this church about it, that World War II was kind of inevitable based on what happened after World War I and the decisions that were made and the redrawing of maps and all of those things and punishing Germany that's what turned them so angry against the rest of the world, that where we are now, what are we doing to cause things in the future? So I have no idea, I can't predict. I look at the parallels all the time.
I think one of the questions that comes to mind for me is, to what extent is a direct act like attempting to assassinate Hitler right versus bearing witness? As you just said, there were glimmerings of information about what was happening in Germany, in the U.S., but it was too early, I think, for people to accept it. And, for his faith, what was the better choice? Was it to be a voice of witness to what was happening, or was it to participate in an assassination plot? That's what I struggle a bit with.
Well, Chris asked one of my questions, so we'll open that up for conversation. Like, at what point, he's still, the movie kind of depicts that he's a little bit shifted, but that's not actually accurate. Like, he still was a pacifist, and he would say that his role in this plot to assassinate Hitler was something that was a needed sinful act, that it was still like what he shouldn't be doing, but it was also needed. So I guess that's the question, is at what point do you think that becomes a thing? Jesus says, my followers are not of this world, at the point where the Roman officials are starting to put him on trial that'll lead him to the cross. And there is this sort of assumption that means that they will not be violent. And so then the question is, at what point do we take these words that Jesus says about followers not being violent and assume that some violence, which, just an aside, this is a plug for our July table talks, which is on peace in our world and just war, so that we'll have 2 weeks on that. There's a lot to talk about with that, but we'll pick and choose what we're talking about. So just a plug, but I'll put that to the group. At what point do you draw that line? Wait, hang on. Wait 1 second. You'll be second. I'm going to have no, hold on to that mic. You got it.
Well, I can't add anything really profound, but I didn't see part 1 of the movie. But as I sit here thinking throughout this and speculating on what part 1 may have looked like, I'm struck how there are so many moral dilemmas along the way here. If I can figure out, based upon what Pastor was just talking about, what constitutes a just war, what should be our role, what stand should we take. Then there's the moral dilemma of how do I put other people in jeopardy? And do I have a right to do that? And I'm just struck by all the conflicts that he must have had along the way here.
I think Bonhoeffer tried to answer that question when he said, if you saw someone driving a car over a bunch of children, isn't it your responsibility to stop them?
Well, a thought struck me in the conversation with the bishop and the bomb and Churchill's refusal to allow that to happen. And the statement was made that there's one thread, but the whole blanket is Nazi brown. And I think that Churchill had more wisdom in that than Bonhoeffer had, because you see, were they successful to defeat Hitler, Germany would still go on, and who would step into his place and carry on. And Churchill's view was, according to that, if you believe that statement, that the whole thing had to come down, not just one leader with another leader stepping into place. So I'm thinking that that is probably the correct wisdom, which then brings me to Bonhoeffer's choice. And I would have to ask, was what he did, becoming a martyr, I suppose, the correct wisdom? Could he not have stood for much more direct and impactful witnessing and sharing had he lived like a good many of his people ask him to do? And which brings then to us, and I suppose, and I don't have profoundity here, but it begs us to answer the question as how best can we serve? How best can we be a light in the darkness? How best can we uplift people? And I'm not sure that always means personal sacrifice to become a martyr. And those are the decisions that I suppose we have to make. And how can we make those decisions for the greater good? And I guess maybe that's what I take from this.
I would add that we've all been given gifts of how we serve others. And so for me, it's a combination of prayer and reflection and what gifts I have to offer to make change in the world, regardless of the situation. And it's scary. And we don't like to step into scary things. But that's part of our responsibility as Christians, is that we recognize the gifts that we've been given and use them to make the world a better place, even in the midst of pretty awful things happening.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that whether he actually said this or not, I don't know, but that line about, I'm convinced that people do not listen to shouting from the pulpit, but whispers in the street. I think that, gosh, I mean, we're all in this, sort of tapestry that we're impacting each other in ways that I don't think we sometimes fully understand. And, it took a lot of courage for him to even preach against what the German church, and then of course he started another seminary in secret, and the confessing church became the result of that. And so there were other voices, but it's also like when people would leave the church, when you all leave here, how many of you remember what I preached How many of you, and then like there's individual choices that get made, as Julie is saying, you know, I mean, it's like we all have these pressures and these relationships in our lives that exert pressure upon us. And so how many of us maybe don't become martyrs, but at least have the courage to say something in the face of something that we know is not right? And it's those little choices that I think can add up to the tide turning, if you will. But, you know, what are our gifts? What are the ways that we choose to have courage in the face of something scary?
I just like to say it's not always the big things. It's the small acts that are done with great courage that we're called to do. I don't think I can do big things, but I can do my best to do small acts.
And I think those small acts have a huge impact, for sure. Other thoughts?
So, in thinking about the small acts and the sermon today, how many people? And just it's a small number. It's a small number of people that may have committed crimes that we judge an entire culture, population. And I think it's so critical that we find in our hearts to ask ourselves that old, what would Jesus do? For every small act, for every person, for every situation, of finding the mercy and the small.
Where do you all find courage?
I'm not sure whether it's, for me, something that's even found. It's usually a reaction at seeing something that, or feeling something that is intrinsically unjust or cruel, and that I don't feel that I can stand by. It's kind of almost like thinking on your feet. But the other thing that was struck home to me from early on days in my childhood was please try to make the world a better place every day, and it doesn't have to be much. I'm quoting my dad.
I think I find the inspiration to try to be brave in the things I experienced in education and reading books. And I read so many books on World War II and the heroes and the courage. And I know I couldn't, like you said, I don't think I could do some of the big things that the heroes in books do, but I can apply that to the smaller things. And I also think that one sermon may not be the aha moment and change someone's life, although it could happen, but I think they reinforce. So for people who are looking every day for a way to make the world a better place, I think sermons, among many other things, contribute to. And I don't think there's one moment that you can point to. Maybe some people have one, but it's the repetition, and it's like seeking a church filled with people that you admire who do things like that all the time that can slowly help you to become a better person. I don't think I've reached that yet, and I think it's a journey, not a destination.
Most of you know that I was a teacher, and for a lot of that period of time, I taught in a bunch of different places, Norm was an electrical engineer, so we got transferred. And in teaching, I often was placed in the inner city. And just saying, changing from my curriculum to the children I was teaching, so it was other-oriented, was the big light for me to have courage to stand up for them instead of me. It wasn't about what I was teaching. It wasn't about curriculum. It was just about other.
Thank you for being a teacher. God bless the teachers. Oh, my. I was just going to ask a question, like, how do you, in the context of our political situation right now, how do you balance between standing up for what's wrong and being divisive? Like, what do you do with that? How do you enter into that with courage and a heart of making the world better, but bringing people together? Because we've shown, our society has shown, we're really good at dividing people. But I think as the church, how do we show courage in the right way to make a positive change?
That's a good thing to struggle with, and I think an answer in part is that there is not a single right way. There are many ways. I'm working on, I teach a class and am working on a book on the topic of energy, climate, and nuclear power. I'm working on the climate chapter right now, and there are people out there on social media who do a important job of holding up stupid things that are said and countering them. I'm glad they do that. It's not my way of doing it. Doing this class and really diving deep into the information is my response. I think there are many responses, and we all find one that fits our situation, I hope.
Well, I've been very upset for a long time and seething over people, especially our president, who put everyone down that they don't like, who are completely disrespectful, who try to make one group, Hispanics, make them out as rapists and murderers when they're just human beings trying to make a living. And that has bothered me for a long time. And I was seething and simmering with it. And when ICE came to the county in September, they knocked down the door of the duplex where my daughter lived when I first came here to babysit for her firstborn. And that's just down the street from me. I can see that door from where I live. And when I saw people in camouflage with weapons drawn, slamming in the door, breaking in the home where my grandchildren were actually born, in that home, that was the one for me that totally and completely did it. I was down the street babysitting elsewhere when I got the videos and the photos. If I hadn't, I probably would have done something stupid like run out there and scream. But it made me realize that I have to find a way to build bridges to a community with which I am not familiar, and that is the Hispanic community. And one of the first things I did, I'm in Dillon Valley, one of the first things I did was realize that I don't pay any attention whatsoever. When I'm driving out of the subdivision, I'm driving out my little court, if there's Hispanics in the car, they drive by. There are other people, I tend to wave or smile. And I made up my mind to smile at every Hispanic I see, everywhere, just as a small gesture to build a bridge. And I worked with some people at Mountain Dreamers to hold a fundraiser to help the families of those who were abducted. And I will go farther.
I think that bridge building is so important across like so many different barriers that we've created, politically, racially, etc., economically, linguistically. And I think I do think Chris is right that it's not one way. There has to be multiple ways, and it's like whatever the way is. But I think that a lot of it starts with a way of trying to figure out how to both listen and learn from each other, but also, for me personally, I think there are certain places where it's like, I will not cross this line. The sanctity of life for all people, and the ways that there's injustice being purported against certain members of our those who are in our country. And there's just certain things that we can disagree about, a lot of things, but those things are not things that we can disagree on. And so a lot of it comes back to faith, and it's like, what does Jesus, preach and love for not only ourselves, but our neighbors? And who are our neighbors? Like, they're the Samaritans who we hate. And so, and the thing is that in that parable, the Samaritan is the one who renders aid. So the person that we hate is the one who helps us. And so sometimes it's not just about us being the Samaritan, but also receiving help from the Samaritan. So anyway, I just think that there's no one right answer. I think some of it's about being open, but also being honest about, here's where the line is that I will not go across, and being clear about that.
I think the original question was, how do we find courage to take stands and act? Yeah, right, okay, right. One way that I would say is to be willing to be vulnerable, to be willing to be disliked or rejected at certain times. And I'll give you an example of that right now. I totally understand and agree with what Marcia was just saying about her personal situation. But at the same time, I can relate at another situation. My son, who lives in Georgia, was a good friend of a gal who used to be the babysitter for Lake and Riley, the gal in Georgia who was brutally murdered by an illegal immigrant. And so I can see things cropping up on both sides make it difficult to reach decisions, but call for courage from people.
I mean, yes, but I'll also say you can't chalk up an entire group of people based on one person's actions.
Well, I'm not doing that.
Okay.
It occurred to me that when Chris asked his question, that we are instructed to love our enemies, and that's not so easy to do frequently, but we can love our enemies, but that doesn't restrict our speaking the truth and sharing the truth. So it's possible to speak the truth in a way that doesn't attack our enemies for being stupid, bigoted, I don't know, any name you want to call them, but to refer to what the truth is and what we stand for, both as Christians and also those of us who love America, what we stand for Love America. And that's, truth, justice, pursuit of happiness, like we learned in second grade or something. And to remind people of that, and maybe that's one way, Chris, I don't know, that we can do both.
I hope we can. Any other thoughts? Questions?
Dietrich Bonhoeffer was one heck of a brave man.
I mean, I think there's a testament to the conviction with which he understood both Jesus and the role of faith in his life, to the point where he's willing to die for it. And, I mean, I always wonder, what am I willing to give up, for the sake of what I think is right? And I think that's the question that we all leave here with, because we can sit here and say that it's X, Y, and Z, but I don't think that we have to answer that until you hit that point. I mean, some of us have had experiences in this world that have made us answer that question. And, I think that sometimes a lot of us have enjoyed on some levels we're comfortable with where we are. And so we haven't had to have that sort of question asked of us and then have to give a response. But as we go from here, I agree with Steve that we don't all need to be martyrs. And instead, as Marcia said, it's all the little things. And sometimes we do have some bigger moments in our lives that we do, have courage for certain action or inaction. But, as we go from here, think about what is it that is most important. And for Bonhoeffer, it was God and Jesus in particular, and the ways that Jesus lived and called us to be living our faith in the entirety of our lives and not just retreating into churches to feel safe and then go out and do things however we wish.
And look for the goodness in others, because it's there. It's there.
Thank you all.